I built a functional interactive web app with Plasmic and connected it to a Python backend. Forget the useless developer docs. Today I'll show you how to make your own custom Plasmic component that actually talks to your code. Let's get into it. I'll start with showing what we're going to code today. So it is a new slider in Plasmic. For me, what this represents is a new constraint in this Pokemon team generator that I've invented. Obviously, this isn't all that helpful. However, if you've got a website that does have a sort of slider or interactive components, this could be the tutorial for you. We will also be coding in one of these text boxes. And what this does is it returns data following the processing in Python. So for example, here, if I change this to 10, there's an algorithm that discretely tries to minimize it with 10 as the upper bound. So it returns as 9.5 and 6.5. But we'll get into that later. The first thing you're going to want to do in Plasmic is to click this plus icon, go down into this customizable components section and find a customizable component that you want and insert that into your page. The important thing with these sliders and all those customizable components is if we right click and go to edit component slider in place, which is also control enter, you'll see that there is in component data, we have this onChange async function. What this allows us to do is detect if there's been movement on the slider, and then obviously we can execute an action based on that. The next thing you want to do is just plumb in the rest of your text so it looks good. So I've added my decorative texts. We now have this offensive constraints. So if I press this play button, we can see that between power and defensive, there's offensive. However, if I go back into my website and give that a reload, it's not there. So that's the one that I've added, and that'll be the focus of the tutorial. There's a couple of teaching moments that I need to explain here. We'll do the slider first, and then we'll do the text box. The way I created this was I copied this section here. However, in doing so, you'll notice that this slider is called BST slider 2. This is obviously a very unhelpful parameter name. So this is just PST slider. So I need to rename this. Let's go with min stab coverage slider, starting with a lowercase letter. Now there's nothing else to do for this one because it comes pre-prepared with this onValue change interaction prop. It's fine that this says 0 actions, by the way. Plasmic does get a little bit funny when you directly copy components, and in this instance it's actually best to insert a new text box like so. One hack that I found is if you control enter, you can right click copy style, and then go into your new text box and paste the style to format it like the other one. The important thing to do here to make it interactable is to right click it and create component on this text box. What we're going to call this is stab coverage text box. And you'll see that this now has the atom symbol, unlike this regular text box. This has actually come up unpopulated here, and I believe that's because Plasmic thinks we've created this new global component that we want to reuse lots of times. Probably not how you meant to use it, but I just rename it anyway. And in each instance, I'll create a new one. The next important step is control enter to edit our component in place. In component data, we need to go to state variables, click the plus. We still want a text one. The most important thing to click here is the allow external access and then read and write. And instead of variable, what we need to call this is something like stab coverage SB. And what this means is stab coverage state variable, so we know how to address it. The initial value, let's set that to test, and we'll confirm that. I've decided I don't like it saying test actually, so I'm going to make it say stab. The way I changed this is it was just directly in the sort of hard code from double clicking. So if I change this, you'll see that stab has not changed. This text here doesn't matter so much. This is only to make it visible in the Plasmic screen. In reality, this is only ever going to display external data, so we won't see this stab bit. The next important part is to make this text here actually updatable. The way we do that is a control and enter. And then for the text, rather than the content, what we want to do is if we go into component data and we see this state variable that we created. So if we copy this, so click in again, and then we're going to go for the content. This, we actually want to use a dynamic value. So for our dynamic value, we want to switch to code, and then the code we want is $props dot, and then we're going to paste in the state variable that we just copied and save that. The way that you get a preview value in here is by popping it in here. So for example, we'll put test. For some reason on this one it's not working, but you can see with all my others that if I update this to say some weakness 2, it updates. So that's the place to put that. For the next part, what you need to do is wire up your backend or the logical side of things. For me, this is in Python Anywhere, and you'll see I've got a sort of weakness cap per attacking type. So what that applies to is this bit. So what I need to do now is go into my Python and essentially add a new clause in here that handles the logic for the, what do we call it, stab attacks, something like this. I've added in my min stab coverage per type in my Python file, and next I need to go to the bottom here and plumb in the payload for what's essentially going to be stab coverage totals. This will be bespoke to your site, but essentially the information from this part will be what we plumb into the text box eventually. This is your next prompt to save the work that you do, and then in Python Anywhere anyway, there's an additional save thing where you have to re-upload the website. But just including this because we all make the mistake of why is it not working? The reason is because we forget to sync. I've also not published my plasmic. There's also your queue to publish that because again, it won't work and you'll wonder why. This is the time to do it. At this point, hopefully you've finished plumbing in the backend. So what you can see here for me is essentially formatting the data just so that it produces a string. The word string there was quite important because our state variable is a text component, so it needs to take string data. What we're going to do is plumb in the slider first, and then we're going to do the text box. I'm going to start by searching for a slider that I know already works. BST slider. Now, it is no coincidence that on the working website, BST slider is the component name. In this instance, our slider name is min stab coverage slider. So Control and C to copy that. And I'm going to add that at the top of my page, or my code, sorry. This next bit is important. So essentially this relates my plasmic component name to my Python backend variable. So for me, min stab coverage slider, let's just have a look. The constraint name I'm interested in is min stab coverage per type. So let's bring that across. And it's that easy. So the third instance that we're addressing here is in my, don't fully understand this. This is in my base props at the bottom. This essentially deals with all the interactivity in the website. So every interactable component, whether it's read or write, is in here. This then gets added to my Pokemon card props, which were just the sort of names of the Pokemon you see on the left. This gets added together in a component prop, and then you'll see that this is returned in the plasmic root provider. So I'm not fully sure of the backend logic, and I don't know enough about TypeScript, but I just know this is the place that we need to reference it last. So this will be going above here. Now the slider auto-populates for me. Thank you very much. Let's just plumb this in. I'd actually like all the values it's given for me there. You'll notice that in all these instances, you can just repeat the slider name. So 1, 2, well, and 3 times. This onValue change relates to the onValue change async function that we talked about at the start of the video. What we need to do next is we need to add in our text box. So this is still in the base props part of code, and it's going to go in here. How I like to do this is look at a working one and then copy that. So we've got our total weakness per type, and that is the component name. This means what I need to do is find the component name of our text box and copy that, and that's going to be brought across. That lives in there. Colon, open brackets. Curly brackets, please. This next line corresponds to our state variable. So let's go back to Plasmic and extract that. I'll press Control and Enter to get in there. And then in component data, our state variable is here under props. I'm going to insert that here. And then what I'm going to set that to is essentially stab coverage display. This is the string that I formatted. Before I sync the TypeScript into GitHub, which Vercel pulls from and runs all of this, I'm just going to show you that it's not working. So, for example, I can change this slider and that will have an effect on the Pokemon team. However, the offensive constraint slider does not work at all. However, because I've already synced the Python, this team will be what the Python suggests. And at the moment, the Python has this code hard-coded as 1. But you remember that clause we looked at that allowed our Plasmic component name to interface with the Python variable name. Once I sync our TypeScript, sorry, we're getting there, it will then allow this slider to update things. So it's currently not doing anything and we're not getting any new payloads through. Let's make some tasteful comments for the commit. So added in the stab slider and output text box. And commit that and sync that. Okay. We've been speedy and got over to Vercel so we can see it building in real time. I really like this platform actually. It's completely free. The same with Python Anywhere, and I believe both of them will take you up to something like 1,000 visits a day or something like this. This isn't looking good. It's going to be an unused variable, something like this. I've reloaded the new website. What's great to see in my debug console is that I've got a stab coverage display. However, the text box, you'll notice, is not updating. Where is it? So this should be triggering the on-change requests, and then Python should be returning a payload with some values like this, but we're not getting that. We'll just do a quick debug session now to find out why. I'm sure everyone watching at this point will agree that there's nothing like hours of debugging to make you question your sanity. Everyone will also be delighted to know that this is now working, and I've identified why our text box is not working. The reason why is because I had our Plasmic component with 4 capital letters in a row, which it didn't like. So once I changed that to lowercase, it was fine. And then I thought, let me check the text box. And the text box Plasmic component name was stab coverage SV. Again, 2 capital letters in a row. It was purely a syntax thing. To fix this, what we need to do is go into our component data, and for our state variable, we've just renamed this, and I've been sure to eliminate any sequential capital letters. I told a lie previously, it was actually the state variable, it wasn't the text box component name. So that remains as stab coverage text box with the right syntax. It's just the state variable, and that's pressing Control Enter to get there. I've come back to our code, and I'm going to replace the state variable name, so to accept the string value that I've created, and then this is the Plasmic component name. I'll then commit this to GitHub. Changed the state variable to lowercase. I've come back to Vercel to watch our builds. Not liking this, but got my fingers crossed this is it. It says it's working. Let's refresh the page and see, and cross our fingers. Oh, and this is why we do it. How satisfying is that? There we go. Absolutely perfect. Brings me a lot of joy to say that this is it for today. I'll just quickly recap what we've done. So we've inserted a slider and given that a component name, and then we've inserted a plain text box and converted that to a component. After pressing Ctrl and Enter, we've created a state variable. Then in our code, we've referenced our slider 5 different times, and we've referenced our text box just the once, and in doing so, we've given the state variable a string to use. And it's as simple as that, but that is it. So thank you very much for watching, and have yourself a wonderful day. Ta.